How you doing, guys? Today we're going to take a look at part 2 of making the lid for my battery or my electrical box for the 1056. And as you can see, I did put some coarse mat along the sides. It's all fairly cured. I do have a pretty sizable air pocket. You can see it right there. I don't know why, but I was trying to be as careful as I possibly could be. I also went around and filled in all of the cracks, or this crack area, to build it up so that way I can make a pretty tight 90-degree angle. Right now, what needs to be done, as you can see, it's really rough, and I got this ridiculous thing of resin, but you can start to see the rough shape. And I've done nothing on the inside, so it still slides on and off the box perfectly. I will have to do a little bit of work on that, but for right now, what I need to do is take it outside with a piece of 40 grit sandpaper on my DA, and DA the sides flat, and then DA the top flat, and see where I am with the 90-degree angles, what needs to be worked on, because I'm going to have to fill this in a little bit with some resin, get rid of the air pocket. And then this particular side over here, I don't know if we can see, probably not because I got to rotate it, but it's pretty wavy, so we're going to have to see how bad the waves are. So let me get this thing outside and let's do some sanding and see where we are. With the initial rough sanding completed, I used 40 grit on my DA and just basically went in nice straight lines, or as straight as possible, in order to give you the feel of what I'm going for. I'm hoping to have some nice, pretty crisp 90-degree angles on the top and along the sides. As you can tell, we do have some problems with the corners. There's some divots. I think like this corner kind of comes in, so I got to build this up in order to sand it off. Do have a couple low spots on this edge right there, and although this corner is missing a good chunk of itself down below, I'm not worried about it because I'm going to cut it. I'm going to make the cut off the bottom of it, probably right around in this area, so that's fine. I'm not worried about that at all. This side actually came out pretty good. We can just layer that with some fine mat. Same thing right here, even though this is a little bit of a low spot right there. Right there, it doesn't matter. So preliminarily, with the first rough sand, I'm happy with this. A little bit of filling, a little bit of building up in a few spots, and we should be in good shape. I'm just going to get these corners epoxied and filled in, and then we'll show you what the next part is. Now with the corners built up, and as you can tell, I put a fair amount of fiberglass and resin in this area. I also filled the corners in, and I layered the top with just a coat of epoxy, and as you can tell, that's pretty flat already. Yeah, there's a couple divots, but that needs to be sanded. This side is in a little bit rough shape. I got some work to do on that. This side's going to sand out probably just fine. This side, I believe, is going to just sand out again just fine, and I believe the back side, yeah, the back side should sand out just fine, and the top should just sand out quite nicely too. And you can tell it's almost ready for it. So another good sanding with 40 grit all the way around. We can get those corners pretty sharp, and then what I'll do is I'll just put one layer of fine mat on it, and that will be my basic shape. Alright, so I gotta let this thing cure, and then we'll get to sanding. So after a fair amount of sanding with the 40 grit on my DA, I got this to, I think, like stage 2 rough sanded. The corners are looking really good. I do have a couple, obviously, low spots right here. These aren't that big of a deal, but like that's kind of a deal. This is kind of a deal right here. Where else? Let me try the other side. I'm not too concerned about this because I'm going to cut it above, or I'm going to trim this off above this, but not a big deal. A little bit of a low spot here and there. So I'm right at that point where I'm going to put some fine mat on this all over. I'll do the sides first, and then I'll let that cure, and then I'll just put a nice fine matte layer on the top. And that should give me enough build where I can just do one more final sand with the DA, probably with like 120. And then I'll coat it with epoxy, and then I'll block that flat. And I should be right there. I should be right at a point where I can cut the bottom off, dress the edges real quick, and prime and paint it. All right, so let me get to putting on some matte. So I coated the box with a layer of epoxy. I did put a couple little small pieces of matte in the corners just to get them in a closer. And then I blocked it with 100 grit, and just standard Home Depot style sandpaper with a wood block. I did that, and now it's right there. I'm just going to coat this with one more layer of epoxy because I did kind of burn through in a few spots. Like, this is the original coarse matte, and there's some air pockets in there. And then there's a few spots in the corner that are fairly thin. So I'm going to coat the whole thing with epoxy. And once that cures, I will hit it with like 220 just to make sure that it's perfectly smooth, dial in all of the edges. Then I'll make then I'll take a look at the box, how far down the box I want to have it, and then I'll drop a tape line, a measurement line, a tape line, and then I'll cut the bottom of this ragged edge off with the die grinder and a cutoff wheel. And then from there, we'll prep the inside. So let me get this coated and with some epoxy and get that blocked out with 220. Before I start to sand this out, I thought I'd show you what it looks like just floated with some resin. As you can tell, the corners are pretty darn sharp, which is exactly how I wanted to do it. I wanted to get the corners as sharp as I possibly could. That way I could make a decision as to whether or not I wanted to round them over or ease them over. But right now everything looks like it's really in good shape. I mean, whoops, let's see, I was hoping that would focus for us a little bit. It's not, but you could tell that the corners are in really good shape. Obviously there's some brush marks, but once I start to sand that with 220, this should dial right in, and at least the outer surface will be ready for primer. So after thinking about this last night, I have changed my plan just a touch on finishing the lid. What I decided to do is kind of make the final surface of the inside of the lid. So I just mixed up 4 ounces of resin, poured it in there, got my little corn brush, just sitting in lacquer thinner just to clean it up. Made sure that I got a good even coat all the way around the inside of the lid, the bottom portion, not the walls. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut this off to this rough size or thickness that I want once this cures. And then what I'll do is I'll dress the edges, make sure it's all nice and smooth and doesn't need any touch-up, and then do our final sand on the outside of the lid and get it ready for paint. So let me let this cure. This is going to get hotter than heck. It's actually like almost literally 100 degrees temperature-wise outside today, and the humidity levels like through the roof. So I don't know how much I'll be able to get done today because it's just too hot. And when this stuff actually starts curing, the heat on this is amazing. I might get my heat gun and I'll show you what it gets up to. But that's where we are right this second. I decided to go a little different path. I was gonna, as I said, I was gonna cut it, sand it, and then basically do the inside. I decided to kind of start the inside first. That way I can kind of do one final sanding across the entire thing, and we can get this little project wrapped up. Just to show you how hot this can get, I have my Harbor Freight infrared heat gun or thermometer. There it is. So let's just see. Let's shoot it in there and see. Whoa! I mean, look at that. Where am I? Right there. There is a hot spot in here somewhere, but there it is. 219, 220, 222. Wow. Isn't that amazing? The curing process. Well, if I move over here, well, yeah, right there. We got a hot spot right there in the center. It must be a little bit thicker than anywhere else, but still. 225.8. So even if this thing's off, let's say 5 degrees, that's still 220 degrees. Isn't that amazing? And I don't know if I can show you with the camera, but there it is. You can see the surface tension starting to grow. I always found this stuff to be the coolest to play with. All right, I'm gonna let this thing cool down. Oh yeah, the other thing too, when you got lacquer thinner, be careful. Let your lacquer thinner soaked paper towels or rags completely dry, air dry, before you put them in the garbage, because they can get hot themselves. How many times have you seen a new house burn down to the ground because it was either because of the electricians or the painters leaving stuff around? So when you play around with that stuff and you're going to throw things away, just make sure you let it dry out. So as with most of my projects, I take 2 steps forward and then I have to take 1 step back, and that's basically where I am right now. As you can see, I cut the rough edges, the rough bottom part of the lid off with a die grinder. Essentially, I just measured down, I think 3/4 of an inch. I then just took a piece of tape, actually that blue tape right there, went right around it, and then with my die grinder and a thin cutoff wheel, I just went along it and just zinged the rough bottom part off. So we're all set there. But then, as I typically do, I think of this stuff and I say, oh, I can make it better. And actually I did make it better, but I ran into a problem. I made a little tape dam, as I call it. I just took a piece of, whoops, oof, man, look at the dust. Well, anyways, I took a piece of tape and I went like this across it and taped it down so I could hold the lid like this and pour epoxy into this like little area right here. And of course, you know, that built it up and then made it level, which is perfectly cool. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And I did one side at a time. But unfortunately, what I did was I put too much epoxy in. And you can see this line, the outer edge of this line is actually the outer edge of the box. So I've made it a little too thick and it won't fit. This lid won't fit over the top of the box. So what I'm going to do is I am going to take my die grinder again and very carefully die grind along the outer edge of this Sharpie mark all the way around. And then I'll swap over to a little grinding bit and do the corners to make it nice and smooth. And then I'll just finish it up real light with some sandpaper. And I should have nice straight edges and it should look nice and square. And also it should pop on top of the box. All right, guys, this is the end of part 2. It was a little bit long. I apologize. But in the next video, I should have that fitting quite nicely onto the box itself. And I will start doing the block sanding just to get it nice and smooth, all the edges, make sure all the edges are 90 degrees and things to that nature. Basically a lot of just mundane work. But I'll get most of that done for the next video. We'll fit it to the box, and then we'll start talking about how we're going to modify the box. I've actually come up with a couple different theories. I'll tell you about those in the next video. As always, thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for your viewership. Please like, subscribe, and if you think somebody's interested in the video or into this little fiberglass project, please share it. As always, thank you very much and have a good day.